Good morning, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Valentine's Views podcast. Today will be a post-mortem on another awful performance by your 2-11 New York Giants, 33-15 loss to the New England Patriots on Monday night. Pretty much a debacle from the opening kickoff for the New York Giants, and here to help me commiserate about all things New York Giants is Big Blue Views Tony DelGenio. Morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thanks.
Oh, another late night, another night where two old guys like you and me probably wished we had just gone to bed and not subjected ourselves to that misery.
Yeah, whenever the Giants play at night, it's not going to be good.
No, generally not. Unfortunately, that is generally the case. Tony, let's get right into this. There are a few different subjects coming out of last night that I think we need to talk about. And the first one for me is Abdul Carter. All right, let's talk about Abdul Carter. Second time this season that he's been benched. Second time in 3 weeks by Mike Kafka that he's been benched. And if you believe what the reporting that we've heard, this probably should have occurred long ago under the leadership of Brian Daboll. Kafka's trying to rein this in right now, but I will say Carter is the youngest player on this roster. But this is just so disappointing. This is twice in 3 weeks that he's missed something that he was supposed to be at, a practice one time and what was called a team responsibility this second time. I don't know what that actually is, but it's disappointing, it's concerning, it's alarming. Just your thoughts on how worried about Abdul Carter you are at this point.
I don't know the answer to that question yet because I think we don't know much about Abdul Carter yet. I do think it's part of a larger issue on the team, a team that seems to be lacking leadership or lacking enough leadership. I mean, I look around the Giants team and I see Brian Burns, and he looks to me like a team leader, like the leader of the defense. I mean, not just on the field where he usually plays well, but in the locker room, he seems to be one of the few players that really seems to kind of stand up, face the press, and you get the impression he's somebody who's talking to younger players in the room, and they need more of that on their defense. Their defense is mostly a bunch of anonymous faces, and even the more famous faces. You look at Dexter Lawrence, and I mean, we still don't know what the story is with Dexter Lawrence, but Dexter Lawrence doesn't strike me as somebody who's a leader in the locker room. He looks like somebody who's kind of more going about his own business and kind of good-natured guy, and is not somebody to read the riot act to a young player. At least that's how he appears in public. So, where are all the leaders on this Giants team that are going to make sure that the younger players know what they've got to do and let them know when they're not doing it? And Burns seems like the only one to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about Dexter, I would have considered Dexter a leader. I have in the past considered Dexter a leader. There was a time when I would have considered Dexter the leader of the football team. But Dexter, to me, this year, not only has he not played up to his standard, but Dexter's been a Giant since 2018. Came in with Daniel Jones. And I think there's a part of Dexter Lawrence that has just gotten worn down. Not only by all of the the double teams and triple teams that he's taken, but more by all of the losing that he's experienced. I think there's a part of Dexter, as Vin just dropped in the comments. I think there is a part of Dexter who is kind of numb to it at this point, who is kind of resigned to it. And you just can't, when you get to that stage, it's difficult to lead because, you say things like Dexter said a few weeks ago, when he said, after the Giants had given up 30 some points 3 weeks in a row, he said, well, I feel like I'm playing well, even though he wasn't playing up to his standards. And that's the wrong thing to say. You say everybody needs to play better, and that starts with me. I need to hold my teammates more accountable. I need to hold them to better standards. And that's just not happening. And when you look at the offensive side of the ball, I thought Joe Shane in the offseason tried to bring leadership into every room, but I'm not sure that that's actually worked. On the offensive side of the ball, who is the leader? Andrew Thomas is the most experienced in terms of, being a Giant, but he's a quiet guy. He's not a leader type. Jaxson Dart wants to be the leader, maybe is the leader, but he's still a rookie. And somebody needs to grab him by the earlobes and tell him to get the hell out of bounds instead of taking a hit for no reason at all. Get out of bounds. But I do think there's a lack of leadership there. But back to Abdul Carter, the frustrating thing is when he got in the game last night, Mike Kafka was right. When he got in the game, you saw what he could be. He was a handful to block on every single pass rush. I mean, he had a sack at a big time on 3rd and 1 play that forced a punt. Went for a sack, even though it didn't actually equate to any loss of yardage. But you could see he was in the backfield all night. You can see the talent. You just worry that if this continues, that he's not going to meet the potential that he has. And yes, he's young, and yes, it's a new situation with an interim coordinator. And Dexter Lawrence said last night that the schedule, Dexter used the word, it's kind of shaky at this point. And I don't know if that's because of Kafka or because of the fact that it's, the Giants played on Monday night and things are changing and it's kind of the holiday season and the team and players wind up having other responsibilities, outside the facility sometimes, with team events and whatnot. And also there's a bye week coming up. So the schedule, they're in their bye week now, the schedule changes, but you have to be a pro. You have to be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. That's the bare minimum requirement. Be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And I don't think he's an attitude problem. I just think there's some immaturity there in terms of how he goes about his business.
Yeah, and I hope that's all that is, because as you said, you could see that the potential there last night, right? And I thought he was very effective as a player last night when he did get into the game, right? And so, yeah, that's what they need to see from him. And well, I mean, this year's loss, but I was going to say, they don't have that talent through most of the defense, and so if the pass rushers aren't gonna lead, I don't know who else is gonna lead, because
Absolutely.
Their back seven or whatever count you want to make of it is pretty nondescript.
Absolutely. Vin Scam, made a comment that the Giants are missing aggression, and that's not where I really wanted to go at this point. But, since that comment is out there, there was a stark difference last night in the way that the Patriots played versus the way that the Giants played. Okay. And look at the hit. I think it was Christian Ellis put on Jaxson Dart. And Mike Vrabel said after the game, look, that's what we teach. He said, we show our quarterbacks over and over and over that the rules are that you are fair game to be hunted if you are on that sideline. And we teach our players to hunt. We teach our players to hit that, to take that shot at the quarterback because it's a legal hit. And we teach our quarterbacks to get the heck out of bounds. And we teach that, he said we teach that constantly. But you look at that hit. You look at the hit that probably ended Gunnar Olszewski's season. Okay. I can't imagine that Gunnar Olszewski's not going to miss a few games and the Giants will probably put him on IR. But you look at that hit. There was a hit on a catch that Wan'Dale Robinson made, just a short little 4 or 5 yard catch that I think it was Christian Gonzalez absolutely pounded Robinson. But again and again last night, there were heavy hits, from the Patriots. There was aggression. They were ahead by 23 points when Mike Vrabel went for it on 4th and 6. And I was like, talk about aggression. He's not calling off the dogs here. He's going for it. And what you see from the Giants, and I'm going to pick on Javon Holland a little bit here. Javon Holland goes to make a tackle. And every time he goes to make a tackle, if he's alone, he just sort of grabs on and takes a 4 or 5 yard ride, before somebody comes to help him. And that's, I'm sorry, that's weak. That's just weak. I mean, deliver a blow. That's terrible. It's just and to me, that was emblematic of the way the Giants played, not going for it on the 4th downs when they definitely should have. It's just, there was a stark difference just in the aggression, in the physicality, in the attitude of those two teams last night. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think there's two separate points in there, and so I think the first point is the physicality, the aggression. To me, the Giants' defense is very passive, and again, I look past the defensive line, and in the linebacker core and in the secondary, it's like the only guy there that ever stands out to me in terms of being physical, being aggressive, is Drew Phillips. Okay, and he's somebody who delivers hard hits and hustles to the ball and so on. He's got his weaknesses, obviously, especially in pass coverage, but he's someone who seems to have the right attitude for a defensive player. So, that's one thing that really seems to be lacking. The Giants linebackers. I mean, you never even notice the Giants linebackers out there on the field, except to watch them trailing plays where they haven't set the edge properly on a running play or haven't covered a receiver coming out of the backfield or whatever. But you never see the Giants linebackers doing anything notable, and the same thing I think is true in the secondary these days. The other part of aggression, which you alluded to, is the coaching aggression. And as you said, the Giants had 2 4th and shorts last night, and chose not to go for them. And it's like, what are you doing? It's like, you're not. It's not as if you've got a playoff berth on the line and you have to be careful not to do something stupid. Your season is lost. Try to win a game. And I would say the other part of that, in addition to not going for it on 4th and short, is just the general play calling. I mean, I'm watching there in the second quarter, I think, and they're already behind, 17-0 or something like that. And Kafka comes out and he calls 5 consecutive running plays to Devin Singletary. And yes, after the first three of them, they did manage to get a first down. But I think like on two or three of the plays, he got like 1 yard, and I can see if your offensive line is slicing through the defensive line and opening up, big holes for running backs to gash the defenses 5-10 yards at a time, the way you see lots of other offenses do to the Giants defensive line and linebackers. But they weren't. The Giants offensive line never opens up holes for the running game early in the game for whatever reason. They seem to get better as the game goes on. But if you're already behind by so much, why are you just running 5 plays in a row and not even not even interesting like run designs or anything like that? You're basically running into the middle of the line, 5 times in a row, and it's like, come on! It's like you really have that little confidence in your receivers that you're afraid to actually try to get first downs and go and score quickly and change the mood of the game. So to me, that's one of the more very disturbing things, I should say, about this offense. It just reminds me so much of the late Joe Judge era, when they kind of stopped trying to win those last few games that Joe Judge coached for them.
Tony, you've been reading my column this morning. You've been reading my column because I talked about that. And listen, what I wrote this morning, in case folks haven't seen it yet, I wrote this morning, that it was a disastrous night for Mike Kafka, and that basically Kafka last night coached and talked his way almost certainly out of consideration to be the head coach beyond the end of this season. And look, that starts with the fourth down decisions. You're behind by 20 points at the end of the first half with 1 minute and 13 seconds to go. You have 4th and 1 at your 40, which is, in the modern day NFL, that is a spot where teams go for it quite a bit. You're behind by 20 points. You're 2-10. You're on national TV. I'm sorry, but punting the football there is weak, especially the way your punt team had been playing, giving up a 94-yard punt return for a touchdown. I think they gave up another 22-yard return at one point. And I wrote the same thing that you mentioned, Tony. That is what that was doing, was playing to make sure that the score was semi-respectable. Okay. It wasn't playing to try to take the risk of, well, if this blows up, the score is going to get even worse than it is. That wasn't playing to try to win the game and get back in the game. That was playing to try to protect the score and not give up 30 points in the first half, which is exactly what the defense did, which is exactly what everybody knew was going to happen when the Giants punted the ball. You had to know that the Patriots were going to drive down the field and put points on the board. Given another 15 seconds, they would have put a touchdown on the board instead of just a field goal too. But you had to know that was going to happen. And I get the fact that, 4th and 8 from your own 27-yard line, your odds aren't good. I get that. But there's 7.5 minutes left in the game. You're behind by 2 scores. You're probably not getting the ball back 2 more times. If you want to win the game, you have no choice but to go for it there. And the fact that Mike Kafka has talked again and again and again about being aggressive, he was as passive could be. I didn't have as much problem as you did with some of the run calls, because at some point you have to try to settle the game down. You have to try to get something going. And you also can't throw Jaxson Dart to the wolves and throw the ball 45 times, because he's not going to protect himself as well as the offensive line is pass protecting. You saw at the end of the game when there was zero threat of the run, Dart was taking hits in the last 2 minutes. So I didn't have as much problem with running the ball as you did, but the lack of aggression was the first part for me. Um, Tony, I want to throw something else in here while we're talking about Kafka. I thought that his post-game performance, and I was not at the game. I was not present at the press conference. I watched it on Giants.com and I read the transcript. And Mike is a nice guy. All right. But Mike was a deer in the headlights after the game last night. He was a deer in the headlights answering some of these questions. He was asked 12 different Abdul Carter questions. And all he said was, my decision, coach's decision, my decision, coach's decision. Abdul Carter can be a great player and I support him. Not once did he admit that Carter had done something wrong, that Carter had violated a team rule. He tried to spin it. There was a point where he tried to spin it and didn't get the point across that this was just what he wanted to do in the first quarter and tried to make it seem strategic, which we all knew was laughable.
Yeah.
And, you know, talking about the fourth downs, he said, I was trying to play field position. You're playing field position with a minute left in the first half and you're behind by 20 points? No, you're not playing field position. You know, and then he talked about Jaxson Dart taking that big hit at, you know, and you want to say something along the lines of, we continue to work with Jaxson on learning to protect himself. We need him to protect himself in that situation. And yeah, I wish he would have gotten out of bounds. Okay. Instead, he said, well, he's a tough kid and he bounced up. Like, doesn't matter. He took a big hit. He got up. He was fine. Whatever. Moving on. You know, that's the wrong answer. That's whatever. I don't care. I'm tired of this topic, you know, and that's not leading your football team. So I thought that Mike's performance in his presser last night was just, like I said, it was deer in the headlights, and it didn't give you any confidence at all in his leadership.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and it's a shame because I thought that he had shown some things in his first couple of games as head coach that made you think, well, maybe this might work out. But I thought last night was disastrous on all fronts, and I think there's a certain way that you need to be as a head coach in order to succeed. And I mean, to me, the perfect head coach for the Giants was Bill Parcells. And the thing I loved about Bill Parcells was that it was very clear that he was in charge, and it was very clear that if you weren't doing what he wanted, you'd hear about it. And he knew how to get that across without being as let's say, dour as Tom Coughlin was early in his tenure as Giants head coach. He loosened up finally in 2006 when the players were just about ready to revolt. Okay, and things got a lot better after that. But Parcells kind of always knew how to needle the players in just the right way, and how to and he could yell at the players, but the players then would yell back at him. And there was this famous example of a Monday night game when he and Phil Simms got into it on the sideline, and they were yelling back and forth at each other and stuff. And it was kind of comical, but it was an interesting dynamic though, because he established who he was, but he also established a rapport with his players at the same time. And I think you need that edge in a head coach to make sure that players are kind of behaving the way they're supposed to behave, doing what they're supposed to do, while not making them feel like they're being browbeaten all the time, the way Coughlin did early in his years as Giants head coach. And so Kafka unfortunately comes across as someone who does not have that kind of personality. And it's a shame because he may have a very good offensive mind as a head coach, but you need more than kind of the intellectual side of it in terms of designing good plays and things like that, right? You need to you need to kind of have the pulse of the team and figure out what you need to do at a particular moment in time in order to get the desired effect. And it's not clear that he has that. And I agree with you that after the game last night, and I just read some of his comments. I didn't really, I think, see any of them. You know, that he's more or less taken himself out of the running to be the permanent head coach. And I think by now it's kind of too late for him to do much of anything about that.
Absolutely. And, you talked about Tom Coughlin a little bit, and I would say that Coughlin did learn. And the thing about Coughlin was until the very end, until some of the things happened with Odell Beckham and Josh Norman and all of that, which I think was in Coughlin's final year, I thought, Tom was a guy that held players to standards. When he spoke, you knew he was a leader. You knew who was in charge. He always took accountability, which helped him hold players to accountability. And this was the question that I had about Mike Kafka. He's gotten a lot of interviews for head coaching jobs, and at some point, it's like Eric Bieniemy a few years ago when he was getting interview after interview after interview. At some point, you wonder, what is it that's going on in all of these interviews that is preventing everybody he interviews with from giving him the job? And my question with Mike Kafka has always been, because he's a very reserved personality, is can he step out front, be the leader, be the voice, be the face, be the guy that sets the standards and holds people to them, and can do enough, and can deliver a message that this room full of dozens of alpha males is going to buy into and follow. And I think that over the first couple of weeks, I thought maybe, but not now. Not after last night. Not after he he basically punted on all of his answers last night, sort of like he punted on the 2 4th down situations. And he just didn't coach like a guy who really wanted to carry that football team last night. And that bothered me a little bit. Tony, let's change topics. Let's talk a little bit about Jaxson Dart. What did you think of Dart last night? Personally, I thought his performance was fine with what he was given to work with. I thought his performance was fine. It still scares the bejesus out of me that the kid, seems to not understand protecting himself. I mean, he did dive and slide a couple times last night, but for crying out loud, when there's no place to go, get out of bounds. I don't understand subjecting yourself to that hit. I really don't.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was okay last night. I didn't think he was spectacular last night, but I didn't think he had a lot to work with either. And I think obviously the one play that stands out was the play where he got hit by Ellis going out of bounds. And I saw what he was trying to do. He was getting close to the first down marker, and he was trying to get close enough so that he could get out of bounds while at the same time sticking the football out and getting just beyond the first down marker, and I get it, but it's clear that defenses now know that he's going to try to do that, and so they have it in their heads, I think, that they can take shots at him because he won't shy away from those things. And I mean, he has to learn that, and I don't know how you do learn that, but it's it's something that he obviously has to fix if he's going to be successful in the long term. You just have to hope that somebody like Jameis Winston takes him aside and like and tells him you just have to do things a little
Well,
bit.
it's funny that you mentioned that because I didn't see it, but they mentioned it on the broadcast. They didn't show it during the broadcast, but Joe Buck and Troy Aikman mentioned it. After that series, when he came off the field, Russell Wilson apparently got in his face. Russell Wilson apparently got in his face and, was giving him the riot act about protecting himself and getting out of bounds. And I'm pretty sure that Dart at this point is tired of hearing it. But at some point, you have to show some understanding that these aren't high school or college kids, and you're not a better athlete than they are, and you're not bigger and stronger and faster, and they are going to hurt you, and they're going to shorten your career, and you're not going to be the player that everybody thinks you can be, based on what we've seen the first 6 or 7 weeks of his career. You're not going to be that player if you subject yourself to that hit for no reason. And you know what? I would almost applaud that hit, applaud going for that play in the fourth quarter of a close game. Okay. In the fourth quarter of a close game where you've got to make a play to go win the game. But this is the first quarter. This is the first quarter. You're within a yard, and I don't remember if it was third down or not, but you got with, but you just can't do that in the first quarter. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah. And I suspect that there's another part to it. And that part that I suspect is that, he's out there and the offense just isn't getting the job done. Even though it's only the first quarter, it's like the receivers aren't getting open. Theo Johnson's back to dropping passes.
And he wants to do it. He wants to do it himself.
And he wants to do it himself. And that's part of the problem when you don't have the personnel that you need to succeed. Now Theo Johnson, okay, he played mostly poorly last night after having 3 good weeks in a row. So I don't want to put it all on him, but he can't be your go-to guy. Okay. One of the things that the Giants don't really have on offense is kind of that go-to sure-handed guy who catches everything and is at least a little bit elusive, so that you can guarantee that you'll get the first down. And some of the better offenses in the NFL have that guy that you can always throw the ball to, and they're gonna catch it. Unfortunately, the Giants don't really have that right now. I don't know if they have a single receiver that you can say is just kind of money whenever you throw the ball to him. And so I think probably, or I'm guessing, that again, it's another one of those things that Dart gets into his head and says, I got to do it myself. And if you have that attitude, having to do it yourself, that's when these things happen, and he lets his competitiveness get the best of him.
You admire that, but there are also times when you have to temper it, when you can't do it alone. And there are a couple of comments about the idea that the offense did better with Jameis Winston, which sort of leads to, is Winston the better quarterback? And I'm just going to say flat out, that's pure nonsense. Look, in the first game that Jameis Winston played, he threw 4 balls to the Green Bay Packers that they dropped. Okay. That ended up being a decent statistical game for Winston, although I think he was 18 out of 36. Which isn't great. Yes, he threw a couple of deep balls. Yes, he was a lot of fun. Last week against the Lions with the catch for a touchdown. Jameis Winston's not your future. You have a first round draft pick quarterback. You're 2-10, 2-11 now. I'm sorry, but that kid has to play. because he needs experience. He is not a finished product. All right. Maybe, maybe there are throws he doesn't make yet. Maybe there are things he doesn't see that a guy that's been in the league 10, 12 years will see. But if the Giants are going to have a better future, they need him to learn those things. They need him to play his way through, missing a read, making a bad throw, making a bad decision. They need him to learn those things. He has the talent. And, you but he's a rookie quarterback. And that he's not going to be perfect. I get the fact that, that people are like, oh, Jameis was so much fun. But Jameis Winston is not the long-term answer. He's the backup, and he's the backup for a reason. The future is Jaxson Dart, and you just have to let the kid play through it, whether it's the throws, whether it's, at some point he's going to have to figure out how in the world to protect himself. There was a comment from CT Hiker about just emulate Mahomes. And Tony, the weird part about it is you watch Patrick Mahomes play for the Chiefs for the last couple of years. And to be honest with you, there's a whole lot of hero ball coming from Patrick Mahomes. There's a whole lot of, I have to do this myself. But Patrick Mahomes, when he's running around doing it by himself, he manages to do it while slithering out of bounds and not taking any big hits. He manages to do it without subjecting himself to getting destroyed, by defenders who would love a shot at Patrick Mahomes. And I think that's the part of it. You don't want Jaxson Dart to stop trying to make plays. You don't want him to stop using his legs. That's all part of his game. The 2-point conversion was a great example last night. That's all part of his game. Running around, he got penalized for on the little toss to Devin Singletary because guys were downfield. I mean, that was a run play, and it blew up, and he improvised, and that's all part of his game. But you want him to learn how to do it without getting himself killed. I think that's, and he's got to play to get to that point. So I don't know what else to, I don't know what else to say. And Giants guy, the only thing I'm going to say is it doesn't matter that the backup's better than the starter right now. The Giants are 2-11. They spent a first-round pick on Jaxson Dart. If you think the backup is better than the starter, that's fine. That can be your opinion. But the backup in his 11th or 12th year in the league is not the Giants' future. The first-round pick, who's playing, who's a 22-year-old kid, he's the future. He has to play, and we have to find out what he is, and that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, and just as an example of that, let's go back to the 2004 Giants. Was Eli Manning a better quarterback than Kurt Warner when he came in to become the starter halfway through the season? No, he wasn't. In fact, Eli was terrible in 2004. He did little to nothing in that first half of the season until the final game of the season when he led a last-minute drive to beat Dallas, right? And that was kind of the first Eli moment that we really saw. But Kurt Warner was still the better quarterback at that time. And as Kurt Warner showed, he was far from washed up because he led the Cardinals to a Super Bowl a couple of years later. So it doesn't really matter how good Jameis Winston is compared to Jaxson Dart right now. It matters for Dart's development that he do everything he can to mature as a quarterback. And part of that, I think your Patrick Mahomes example is a great one. Mahomes always manages to get out of bounds without taking a big shot. In fact, Mahomes is kind of sneaky. He'll go to the sideline and start running out of bounds, get the defender to slow down, and then he'll throw an elbow as he goes out of bounds at the defender, and he never gets called for it. But he's a very clever guy. But I think he's a great example because he's learned how to preserve himself, and he, as you say, he's had to play hero ball because Kansas City has since they got rid of Tyreek Hill, he hasn't really had the receiving core that he got used to his first few years in the league. And the Giants without Malik Neighbors are certainly in that situation right now. They don't really have the receiving core that can really exploit a defense.
No, they don't. Tony, let's get off Jaxson Dart for a minute. Let's talk about the Giants defense. We talked a little bit about Javon Holland earlier, and the difference in the aggression that we saw from the Patriots versus what we saw from the Giants. And I just want to talk a little bit about Charlie Bullen and all of that. My thought on the Giants defense last night was I thought Charlie tried to be more aggressive. I thought he tried at times. We saw corner blitzes. We saw safety blitzes. We saw a few occasions where there were 7-man pressures. We did see slightly better run defense last night. We didn't see those big runs off the edge. I think instead of 6 yards a carry, the Patriots averaged 4.1 yards a carry. Still had some big chunk runs, but like I said, there were 6-man pressures. There were a couple of 7-man pressures. So I thought he tried to disguise things by having 6 and 7 and 8 guys up at the line of scrimmage and dropping guys out. I saw more twists and stunts last night. But the reality of it is that it looks more and more like there just isn't, beyond that pass rush, there just isn't the talent that we hoped or thought there would be. Drew Phillips, you talked about, he's a hitter, he's a run defender, struggles in pass coverage. Paulson Adebo, I loved the signing of Paulson Adebo, but he is not, and he's a decent corner, but he's not what the Giants are paying him to be, which is a number 1 corner, which is a guy that can get his hands on the football and change games, by making plays on the ball. Cordale Flott is okay. Got beat for a touchdown last night, but he can be, if Cordale Flott was your 4th corner instead of your best corner, you'd have a really, really, really good secondary. Tyler Nubin is a guy who probably should be limited to the box safety role. He should probably be playing close to the line of scrimmage all the time, just based on his his quote unquote lack of athleticism and his physicality. And Javon Holland, for me, is a disappointment. Again, a guy that Joe Shane paid big money to be a difference maker, and he's just not that. He's so for me, it just becomes more and more clear that there's not as much talent as we thought there was, and some of that talent, like Dexter Lawrence and Abdul Carter, have not performed the way that we thought they would.
Yeah, I think the Giants, I'll throw in the linebacking core, right? You see, and granted, the Giants have had injuries in the linebacking core, but Bobby Okereke, for whatever reason, is just not the player that he was that first year under Wink Martindale. And I don't know what happened to him, whether he's just like slowing down with age or something like that, but he just doesn't make plays anymore. And of course, their other guys are injured, and so they're bringing no-name guys in to start for them at linebacker. But as you say, in the secondary, I mean, Paulson Adebo was terrible. They picked on Paulson Adebo last night. He's supposed to be your CB1, but they threw at him all night, and they targeted him 11 times last night, and he gave up completions on 8 of those 11 for 95 yards and a touchdown, I believe that he gave up. So if that's your CB1 and the opposing quarterback is going after you, right? Then something's wrong, right? You didn't see Jaxson Dart going after Christian Gonzalez all night, right? Christian Gonzalez is a true CB1, and granted he was a first round draft pick, so you kind of expect that of him, but that's what the Giants are lacking in their secondary is really any player that a quarterback is afraid to throw at, and that. And the linebacking core and the lack of depth, quality depth at receiver and so on. This is all coming back to Joe Schoen and the way he has built this team and what he has kind of let fester or has tried to address and has unsuccessfully tried to address. And the secondary is certainly one of those things. The Giants secondary does not look any better than it was when he first took over as GM.
No, it doesn't. Tony, last thing I want to address. There are rumors floating around online that Joe Schoen has been fired. Until you see a reputable source, that is not the case. Wesley Steinberg is a parody account. It is a joke account. It is not someone with sources. It is not someone with information. It is someone out there just throwing crap against the wall to try and get exactly what he's getting this morning, which is attention from people who don't understand that Wesley Steinberg is not a reporter. It is a parody account. And, once in a blue moon, he throws something against the wall, and a day or two later, it actually happens. But this is not a report that is accurate at this point. As of now, Joe Schoen is scheduled to speak to media this afternoon at 1:45. I'm sure that will not be fun. Won't be fun for Joe Schoen. It won't be fun for the reporters asking him questions. It won't be fun for anyone, but we will have all of the information, for you guys when Joe does speak to the media. And Tony, as you said, it's becoming more and more clear that there's ownership when they fired Brian Daboll said that they felt like the Giants had built a good young talent base. Obviously, leading to them concluding that it just wasn't being coached well enough. And at this point, you have to question that talent base. Yes, there's no Malik Neighbors. Yes, there's no Cam Scatterbo. Yes, there's no Kayvon Thibodeau. And those are 3 big pieces of that talent base. But you look around at some of the other acquisitions that have been made, and you're not getting what you paid for. You're not getting what you thought you drafted in Abdul Carter. You're not getting what you thought you drafted in Darius Alexander. You're not getting what you paid for in Javon Holland or Paulson Adebo. You're not getting at this point what you paid for a few years ago in Bobby Okereke. You can go on and on, I guess, but you're not getting, from these guys what you paid for, what you thought you drafted, and that comes back to Tyler Nubin, Drew Phillips, Deonte Banks, on, and that comes back to evaluation.
Yeah, and just look across the line of scrimmage. Patriots were without 2 starting offensive linemen last night, and while I won't say their offensive line played great, they weren't a disaster when they had to put backup offensive linemen in. You had Corey Durden, who was released by the Giants at the end of training camp, coming in and making plays at defensive tackle for the Patriots.
I mean, who saw a Corey Durden revenge game coming last night? I mean, come on. Who saw that coming? Anyway, Tony, I think that's probably a good place for us to call it a day. Did you have anything else you wanted to mention, quickly before we do that?
No, I think that's enough. This is one performance to kind of flush down the toilet as quickly as we can.
Yeah, that's a good visual. All right. All right. All right. All right. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Giants fans, as always, for watching. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.